Hello, my name is Vasilios Kosmakos. Today is February 11th, 2022. I have the pleasure of speaking with...
I'm Richard Palmer.
Dr. Richard Palmer. So to start off, Dr. Richard Palmer, so you just gave us some background about your life story, about a little bit about who you are. But now I would like to kind of get into some more questions about the Trio Center, right, and about maybe its role ecologically within the span of Gainesville. So before the Trio Center, right, wastewater is such an important aspect, it's... Explain the significance of wastewater, right, and why things like the Trio Center are important for the environment.
The idea of BOD removal was confronted after I left the University of Florida. The people in Waldo were having a tremendous hard time. They could not accomplish the BOD removal that was required with their brand new wastewater treatment plant. So a staff member of the Trio Center went out and spent some time with people in Waldo, and they came up with an idea. And the idea was to create a cypress dome and have the unfinished treated water pour into the dome and flow across the grass and the distance. They had a dome in and to different heights, and the water entered at one level and poured out of the other. And as it flowed through that dome, the growth, the vegetation took out the BODs. And when it left the other side, it met the requirement. So that was one of the unique problem-solving research activities that has taken place. Now there is additional to that, when the Trio Center was begun, before it was begun, there was a gentleman who came up to me and said he did not know that the University of Florida ever had such a program. And he was wondering if we could do a program for field distribution, that is, putting pipes in ground and doing so and so. And I said, well, in a sense, yes, I think we can. Here's the situation. Once we got this, we have the building, we're going to have a physical facility that will allow us to invite people to campus and not have to use the university. However, right now, we're using hotels and things like that. And what we need to do is to travel throughout the state and talk about backflow. Now, the reason for backflow, it became a story, or one of the, I asked him to develop a seminar. It was a 1.5-day seminar, which we held in the hotel. And one of the topics that he came up with was a contamination with Chloridaine. Now, Chloridaine is no longer allowed to be manufactured. It was so deadly and so poisonous, it lasted for hundreds of years. If you put Chloridaine in the ground, it stayed there. And it would contaminate any water and below it. If it seeped into the aquifer, you would have Chloridaine in the water because it's still there. And so they refused to let it be manufactured anymore. And that story that was one of the items that we included in the field distribution program led to the concept of how do you prevent contamination getting into water pipes. And that came up with the idea that there are water flow in pipes in the direction you plan, but sometimes there's water flow in the direction you didn't plan, and that's called backflow. And so we came up with a program that would describe how backflow occurs, and we were not allowed to advertise it as a certification program, but we did finally get permission to call it a voluntary certification program.
How does backflow occur? How does backflow occur?
Okay, backflow occurs whenever there is a water pressure from some other source than the one you expect. In other words, let's say you have a backflow from a reservoir. You have a water tank that's sitting up there. You have to put water up there. Now, there's pressure up there. The pressure is still there. It's a battery in a sense. And when you open it up and let it flow from out of the water tank, it's different than the way it went up. Now, same thing. Let's say that you got 5,000 acres of land or thousands of acres of land, and you have it irrigated with, say, a 2-inch pipe. There's a lot of water in that 2-inch pipe. But if you don't protect it, when you stop pumping, it flows back into the well. So what they did, first of all, they have a barometric loop that will, if it's above the pipe that goes there, goes in an arc above what air pressure. Air pressure is able to move water in a direction. The pressure of air, atmospheric pressure, pushes water up to, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 22, 24 inches per square inch. And it can go up to 22 feet. Okay, 22 feet. Because if you add the pressure, air pressure is 14.7 psi, and it goes 22 inches for each, that goes way up. And if you make a barometric loop, you can turn your water off and it comes back, flows back, but it can't get over the loop. Or if they decided the backflow became a problem first in California in the period before the Second World War. Japan had almost no metal resources. Most of the metal that they used to make cannons and gunfire came from scrap fields in the United States. So for years and years and years, they were buying all the scrap metal they could get, and they were bringing large tankers or tanks, or I would assume tanks. I don't know how it was handled, but they just dumped it in, probably very large conveyors, and parking them on the west coast near California. And they noticed that there was always, when a tanker came in, there was somewhat disease, oriental diseases in the community, and sometimes as far as 35 miles away. And they couldn't understand that, so they finally decided it had to be water that was coming off of the ship, from the bilge of the ship and from the discharge of the impurities into the bilge from their waste, and going back onto shore into the water supply. And they put a flapper valve in. You know what a flapper valve is? Yeah. It's a valve that would, if you hit it, it will go up against us and stop flow. But when the water becomes still, it just starts floating. And it doesn't take but a teaspoonful of water to kill half a dozen people. And so they put flapper valves in, and they put 2 or 3, and they didn't do anything. And they finally decided they better put a spring on one. They put one, and it took about 3, and they still didn't get it done. So they put 2 together and put springs on them, and designed it. That out in California, they call it the Foundation for Backflow Prevention. And the epidemiologist knows that if you let water flow backwards in your pipes, it's going to suck in, or in any source that's there. In other words, if you have a fire hydrant down there, and just flushing the fire hydrant's bad enough, but if you had attach a hose to it and suck 350 pounds of pressure out, you're going to suck the pressure. If I've got 65 pounds of pressure in my pipes here, the pipe there with a water pipe, a fire hydrant on it, probably goes down to, well, legally, they can't lower below 20. But the 65 in the house goes down to 20 because it goes out. At 65, it's more than 20. If they take the outside line pressure to 20, the 45 pounds of water in here is going to go down to 20. So that's how backflow occurs, and there are just literally hundreds of thousands of ways that it can happen. But the most prevalent backflow event takes place with a water hose. And the water hose backflow preventer is called a hose bib vacuum breaker. And plumbing code requires that the hose bib vacuum breaker be on the outside of on the hose bib of every outside water supply. And even that sometimes doesn't work because people want to break it off. They don't like it. It limits the supply. And that's a bit of backflow. That's not all backflow, but that's a way that backflow occurs. We've had backflow occur out of swimming pools, out of film developing facilities. I did a program at Camp Reynolds, not Camp Reynolds, at the Marine Corps base in North Carolina. But can't talk.
Camp Lejeune?
Camp Lejeune, okay. Lejeune had a problem with their backflow. They put in a backflow device at the film laboratory to prevent. They were getting chemicals out of the film developer into their water by backflow, and they put a device in and it didn't stop it. So somebody called me. I said, well, what did you put in? And he put in the type he should have, what is called the RPZ, reduced pressure zone backflow preventer. I says, okay, did you put it in the right direction? You have to, there's an arrow on the device that tells it whether to go, the water is supposed to go this way, and that's the only way it will flow through that device. And they put it in backwards, and the water was still flowing out of the tank into the water supply around the backflow preventer because the backflow preventer was installed in the wrong direction. Anyway, that's a brief comment of how, and there have been Holy Cross, their whole football team came down with hepatitis one year, and they fielded half a team, and before the game was over, they didn't have enough people to finish. And I would tell you and make the statement that if that happened to the University of Florida, 3/4 or probably more than that of the businesses in the neighborhood within 3 miles of the stadium would go out of business. Because it took a number of years for Holy Cross to regain any kind of prominence in in the field. They were a big powerhouse, and it took a long time for them to finally get back to being a powerhouse. So that's the effects of backflow prevention, and that was one of the prime emphasis for the TRIO Center. However, there were others. We had several grants, air pollution, solid waste management, and things of that nature that ran short schools and seminars long before we ever had a building. And the building came about with the realization that if the University of Florida sought to see if the Siegel building would hold, well, would be satisfactory, and they were told that the engineer said that it wasn't strong enough to maintain the weight or the load, yet it was, because they overbuilt it, the man who overbuilt it. A new boss sat in on some of them and helped me. One of those programs happened to have been the workshop known as the Water and Wastewater Institute. It was a 5-day institute and held at the quarter break, because we put it together with the quarter break when we were on the quarter so that they could go use the classrooms on campus, and we had the hotel place where they stayed for our meal services and our meal in the room. And that brought about a lot of different conditions. And that ultimately, my office in that job was in the Siegel building. And the Siegel building is important to know that at that time, the University of Florida owned it. They were unhappy with it for several reasons. First of all, the Siegel building had a flowing artesian well in the basement and continuously had to be pumped. It was also old and needed continuing maintenance, and it was so far off campus it wastes probably, well, now this is supposition. I assume that the time that it took at 20 miles an hour for the people to get from the maintenance shop to the Siegel building was expensive time, because they would bring 3 or 4 people at a time, and they were all driving in the same truck. And both trips, there and back, were very slow. So it was very expensive to keep up, and it was getting older. I was in an office that the wind blew through it like it was you were out in the open. And so the University of Florida was planning on abandoning the Siegel building, and that gave me an opportunity later to talk to someone about what my personal idea for what later became the TRIO Center was to remodel the Siegel building and make a center for training for water and wastewater operators.
So what is the TRIO Center? What does it do? What is the TRIO Center? What does it do? Why is it important?
All right, the TRIO Center, the name TRIO is an acronym for Training, Research, and Education for Environmental Occupations. After several years, I was planning an upcoming workshop which required a lot of I call them powerful or influential people. For instance, the utility director for the Fort Lauderdale, the water director for Jacksonville, the director of utilities for Pensacola were at a planning session for an upcoming workshop. And when we got through with the workshop, I started thinking and suggesting that the university was interested in getting rid of the Trio Center, and it ought to consider the possibility of remodeling it and creating a center for training for water and wastewater operators. Now, where the University of Florida was involved was in continuing education, and the way they got involved was back in years ago in the Depression. The state of Florida came up with an idea of building a water canal, a barge canal across the state of Florida, and it would be just below Bellevue, Florida. And they had already started the digging. They had a dam was built. Rodman Reservoir was they knew to begin with that there was going to be a dry season and that there would not be sufficient water to float even barges across Florida all year long. So they had to build a reservoir. They destroyed the Silver River, and they had a camp down in below Ocala, below Bellevue, known as Camp Roosevelt. Now, where the Camp Roosevelt came into play was that the University of Florida brags about being a land grant university. The Morrill Act of 1862 created land grant facilities given to it says one to each state, and to provide for agricultural and mechanical education. Now, this was quite a dramatic change over typical education at the time. The education of the time was classical in most instances, and people went to the university to learn classical literature and history. And the fact that one of the parties in the United States did not want to have agriculture, they stopped. It was Morrill tried to get the act passed earlier, but they held it up until the Civil War began, and somehow the other party got to pass it in 1862.
The other party being Republicans or Democrats? Which other party are you referring to? You're referring to a political party, the other political party. Which party are you referring to? Was it the Democrats that tried to stop it, or was it Republicans?
Well, it was the Democrats that stopped it.
Okay.
And the Republicans finally got it passed. And what they did, the University of Florida, by the way, is a land grant institution. And now this is where it ties in. It had a competition for Lake City. The normal school in Lake City wanted to have the University of Florida located there, or the university located there. It wouldn't have been the University of Florida. It would have been some other university. However, the citizens of the university, or the citizens of Gainesville, offered to provide water for the university in perpetuity for free. And it was the water that they were providing that caused the Board of Control. Now, the Board of Control was what it was called in the days that controlled all the education of Florida. It's now the Board of Regents. It's changed. But anyway, the Board of Control assigned the University of Florida to the Gainesville on the specification that they would get water. Now that water was from Boulware Springs, and it was not treated in any fashion. It was taken right out of the spring and pumped throughout the community without any treatment, without anything at all. Sometime during the early Depression, someone came up with an idea that water had out of a well or a spring was not pure water, and it was not really potable. Now, potable water is the pure water that can be drunk supposedly without harm, and that they wanted it to be treated for the possible contaminants that may be in it, and that treatment would be chlorination. And of course, most of the people who were operating water plants, now water plants in Florida at the time were little more than wells pumping water up into a reservoir overhead and allowing the pressure of the tanks to pressurize the center. And with no purification, no potable water at all, or no guarantee, they were required to put in chlorine. And of course, some of the well drillers didn't have the foggiest idea, or most of them probably didn't have the foggiest idea how to chlorinate water and keep a residual. So they came to the university and looked up a chemist, a Dr. Black, and asked, A.P. Black, I think was his name, and he was a chemist for the university, and they asked him to show them how to chlorinate water and maintain a residual.
What is a residual?
The residual of chlorine must be in the water that you drink.
Okay.
Now, besides chlorine today, we also have fluoride in the water. And we had to fight to get the residual in there, and we had to fight to get the fluoride in there. They both have, fluoride has a relationship to your teeth and your bones, and the chlorine has residual to bacteria and other disease elements.
There's been some, contemporarily speaking, some people discuss the issues with putting fluoride in our water. Is there any merit to any of that?
The fluoride?
Fluoride.
Yeah, they don't want it because they have some objection to any contaminant. They were already getting chlorine, and they didn't object to that because what happened was that the city of Gainesville had a period where they came up with a great idea. They were building a new woman's prison, and they put iodine does as good as making it potable as does chlorine. And they put iodine in the system at the women's prison, and somebody said, well, if we can do it down there, we ought to do it here. And they put iodine in the water in Gainesville, and they had more of an uproar than you can imagine. They almost refused to drink water.
But why was there an uproar?
Taste.
Taste, okay.
Oh, it was a terrible taste.
Okay.
Now, by the way, the astronauts use iodine to purify water because iodine doesn't have the same valence as chlorine, and chlorine is very explosive.
Even in survival situations, you put iodine tablets in your water to purify it, correct? You can buy iodine tablets.
Yes.
To purify water.
Correct? If you wanted to.
Yeah.
But actually, there's a method. If it's not terrible water, I'd say if you had well water and you wanted to be real sure that it was potable, if you put it in a plastic bottle and let it in the sun for 24 to 48 hours, you probably have potable water.
they do that in Africa quite a bit, right? From my
And iodine will do it also.
Yeah. So then, so from what I'm understanding, there seems to be a need, right? That the residents of Gainesville, right, wanted to started. The residents of Gainesville wanted to start purifying their water, right? First of chlorine, right? Now fluoride, right? Why did that need develop? Was there a specific instance where people getting sick when we weren't doing that? Why did that happen?
Well, the federal government decided that the chlorination was necessary for people to drink pure water.
Okay.
And the word is, early on, that word was not potable. I won't even pronounce it. I won't tell you that they used to call it potable water. It's spelled P-O-T.
Yeah, yeah.
If you look at the diacritical marks on P-O-T-A-B-L-E, it's potable, not potable. And I hate to even use that, but when I got into this field with the short school, they were still using the old word, and I don't know. I claim that I'm part of the reason why the whole United States now says potable water.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but I've had people call me up from Tallahassee, from St. Augustine, from all sorts of places to tell me that they want to be sure that I was correct, and I explained to them why I was correct and why it was potable.
Okay, so going back to what you were originally saying then, Gainesville starts putting chlorine in their water supply, right, from Boulevard Springs. Finish what you were saying about that. So what's next in the story? So Gainesville puts chlorine in their water supply.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's continue on with the story, right? So why is that significant, and where do we go from there? How does that relate to the Trio Center?
Well, the significant was that it purifies it, first of all, and it ties into the Trio Center because Dr. Black taught the classes at Camp Roosevelt in just out of Bellevue, and later created a Black Crow in Eisnes, and then they were purchased by a firm from California. Now, Dr. Black and his group were process engineers. The firm in California was a structural engineering firm, and they built the facilities to treat wastewater and water, and Black treated it. And so that's how those two, finally, CH2M Hill bought out Black Crow and Eisnes, and for a while they used both names, and they have dropped the Black Crow and Eisnes name now, and they're all, and the University of Florida was in correspondence study also got involved, because one of the things that people were having trouble with when they took the exam was mathematics. And it was not a terribly hard course in mathematics. I mean, you didn't have to do too much, but the University of Florida began a course in mathematics for people in a correspondence. The correspondence school began offering, and that was part of continuing education also, a course in mathematics and directed toward operations and operators who were to be certified. Actually, the certification had a sort of individual, the Operators Association created certification for themselves. It was not formally adopted as a state requirement for quite a number of years. And then after it was formally adopted, the state took over and took over a number of activity and guaranteed the requirement that people took a state-required course and exam. And the training program became part of the state requirement. The idea out of Camp Roosevelt, Florida has one of the largest aquifers in the United States.
In the
Not
world.
the largest, but one, in fact. And so most of Florida had water that was out of wells. Very few. There were a few surface water treatment plants like Tampa, Palm Beach, and I'm not sure where. I know there were a couple of others, but I don't know exactly. I can't give them to you right now. But they were surface treatment, and they had problems later. One of the things that also grew out of the beginning of the Trio Center was our recognition of backflow of water in pipes for people, and that was developed as a result of people getting sick from water and wastewater being put together in the same pipe and delivered as potable water. One in Tampa, and well, two in Tampa, two different locations in Tampa were primary for creating, I say 400 or 500. I don't think they killed anybody, but almost 400 or 500 people went to the hospital in Tampa as a result of an 8-inch water pipe being filled with 8 inches of sewer line. And that's part of, again, part of the things that the Trio Center is interested in and protects. The Trio Center is environmental completely, though. It was not just water and wastewater. It was opened as a result of the idea that the Siegel Building might become a training center for water and wastewater, but also include other environmental concerns, because they do include air, waste, solid waste management. In fact, every field of the environment has some relationship short schools that can be conducted and are through the center are conducted. And it's going to be about the Siegel Building and why it's important in history and how the events of the Siegel Building being thought of as a remodeled Trio Center allowed the Trio Center to become a reality. So I'm going to talk about the Siegel Building and its significance to the community and to the university. By the way, its significance, there are two things that it did that nobody knows or hardly knows. Do you know what the Norton bomb site is? Well, the Norton bomb site won the Second World War. It was so precise that it could put a bomb down a smokestack, and it was used in daylight bombing. And that was developed on the 10th floor of the Siegel Building. And I think it's worth talking about during this interview. And then there's also the proximity fuse. And the proximity fuse is the depth charge. And it can be either depth or height. In other words, its proximity is set by pressure, water pressure or air pressure. And if you go up in an aircraft to a certain level, the pressure reduces. And I will include the fact that it had a secure floor. The 10th floor of the Siegel building was secure. Phenomenology. Well, you know what a phenomenon is.
Yes.
Well, a phenomena, one of the ways of explaining phenomenology is everyone says if there's a tree falls in the forest and there is no human ear, there's no sound. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Okay, do you believe it?
No.
You don't believe it. Why?
Because things happen irrespective of whether we're present to see them or not.
Well, no, it happens, but it happens in vibrations, not sound. Sound happens up here. See, the vibrations get inside the ear.
Yeah.
And the vibrations cause sound to be recorded. And that's where the phenomenology is. Everybody carries the world in his head.
Fascinating.
He invented the world from his experiences. And Heidegger was a field marshal in the German army, and he was asked many times why he didn't reject his field marshal period. He said, well, it would belie my phenomenology because I truly believed in my Führer. So it was, he toured America. In fact, I think I had a chance in Lakeland one time to hear him make a presentation. Anyway, now, went to Florida Southern. Oh, tell you how I got to school. I was a football player, good football player, I think. And I had an offer of scholarship to Georgia Tech. And when they offered me the scholarship, I was still in high school, and it says, I've got to spend one more year in high school because I failed 3 classes, and the state of Florida will not let me play football because back in those days, we had what was semi-professional football players in high school. They had failed 2 or 3 years of their senior class so they could play football. And the state passed a regulation, what they called the 6-semester rule. And if you had 6 semesters in high school and you were in the 7th semester, you were not eligible. So Bobby Dodd, the coach, gave his assistant coach instructions to get me in a junior college somewhere. So he called GMC, which is Georgia Military College in Milledgeville. And my dad had a heart attack about 6 weeks before I went up there. And he was still in bed when I left. And when they told me the scholarship didn't include the cost of my uniforms, I called home and there wasn't going to be any uniforms. I couldn't go to class without a uniform. So I packed up and came home. So I missed the chance there. That fall, during the summer of Christmas vacation, I went to Rollins College and played about, now you have to know that when I was being recruited, it was a completely different world. In fact, when I went to Georgia Tech, I went out there and suited up and scrimmaged with them for 3 days. And I scrimmaged with the Rollins College for a week and a half. And the first 2 teams didn't score the first touchdown on the defense that I was playing on. So but the head coach was not there, and he never did get in touch with me later. So I didn't go to. So I had given up of ever going to school. On my vacation, no, not vacation, high school senior class party, we went to Clearwater Beach. You know where Clearwater is? Okay.
I'm from St. Petersburg, so Tampa and Clearwater are very familiar to me. I was born in St. Petersburg, Florida, so Clearwater is...
Where?
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know, okay.
Tampa,
I didn't know.
Yeah, Clearwater, that's my neighborhood.
Okay, well, do you have a phone from New York?
Yeah, my family's from New York, from Rockaway Beach and from Long Island.
Okay.
So very familiar with the places. You're
Okay, well,
discussing.
I've been there, and
Yeah.
but that was, I almost forgot some of it, Well, I remember, the town boys, they had one, Hawk, he was about 6'5", and I used to go to the festivals. They had street carnivals every weekend while we were up there, and I used to get on his shoulders and watch the fireworks, and I could see over everyone. Anyway, where was I?
So Clearwater Beach.
Clearwater Beach, and I'm out on the beach. There are two girls in the Gulf. It was after lunch, and I was playing softball with some boys, and I took a hefty swing, and the bat slipped out of my hand, and it went out, and it picked out one of those girls. Sounded like a ripe watermelon when it hit her, because it bashed her right smack in the head with a heavy end of the bat. And the girl that was with her just threw up her hands and yelled. She wasn't even paying her anything. She lay flat in the ground, breathing the water in. And if I hadn't followed that bat out, she probably would have drowned. I mean, I don't claim that I saved her because I put her down there. Okay, the coach or the principal was there, and he had been my 9th grade coach, but he had become principal in the meantime. And so he took her to the hospital with the ambulance, or went with him, and came back and looked me up. I had gotten separated from the rest of the group, and was out on a porch. And there were about two of the boys, two or three of my football players that had been with me. And he asked one of them if they had signed a scholarship or going to school. No. All three of them, no, weren't going to school. He asked me. He didn't ask me because he didn't think I was smart enough, I guess. But anyway, he said, well, I've got a friend that's a coach at a little junior college in South Georgia, Norman Junior College. He said, and he will not have any money, but if you want to play football, I'll get you on his team, and he'll get you a job after a season. Well, one of the two boys wound up getting a scholarship to a place in South Carolina. I can't remember. The Citadel. And he was too dumb to finish even that. Anyway, he finally wound up married one of the girls, and good-looking girl in Plant City. Now, I passed through something that's important. Because I was one of the younger people, and I was not old enough to be drafted throughout the period of the war, and I was amongst that group of people, and the city had a volunteer fire department. I got to be a volunteer fireman while I was in high school. Now, I had some exciting events. I had a roof fall in on me one time. I had a hose almost get away from me, and the buddy that had hold of the hose fell on top of it to keep it from getting away. And we were going up to a fire that was extremely hot, and the tarmac, he fell on. He had to go to the doctor with him. He was burned terribly bad with his body. I laid on top of him, and I didn't get burned. But anyway, and then I had another event where a boy fell through a roof and I sat beside and grabbed him to keep him from falling very far. Anyway, experiences. Just telling you, I had those experiences. Now, my last summer, I broke up. Well, let's see. I couldn't get a job. I got a job in an ice cream parlor, and then went to work for a theater, and became an assistant manager. Now, the reason I went to work for the theater, I worked 6 weeks or 8 weeks period in the potato business. Now, that was an interesting story, and I'm going to try to get. the three brothers were in the business of selling potatoes, and they provided the Tampa Bay area potatoes 12 months a year. They went from from Homestead to Hastings to South Carolina to Pennsylvania to Canada, and followed the potato deals all the way up. Well, I worked for them for 1 8-week period in Hastings. And my boss I had the three bosses, they had cars, new cars. One bought a brand new 1990, 49, is it 49? 49. Ford. And we were on our way to Hastings, and at Highway 50, a farmer with no body, nothing, ran out, and I'm sitting on his side, and he hit the side of the car right back of my door jamb, and that thing pulled me out over the road. The door did, and then it went across. We went across the road into a culvert, and the door threw me back in. So anyway, I saw that. I had to hitchhike up to Brooksville or Bushnell to call the highway patrol, and then hitchhike back to get there. Anyway, that's another story, and I brought that in because I've had some exciting things happen. Now, the last year, I went to work from the theater business. I worked in the theater. The reason I went to work in theater, I made pretty good money in the Hastings potato deal because I worked all day long. I kept house for the owner, and he slept in one end of the trailer, and I slept in the other, and cooked dinner and breakfast and all the meals. And I cooked for 22 people one time, fish and fried potatoes and grits and whatever it was. And when I went home, I stayed home. I cooked lunch for my family to keep from having to go to church. So I stayed in most of the day, and I had a big wad of money. It was not little money either when I got through with that. I used to hang it on a nail in the back of the door as a safe place because I didn't have a bank account. But then I finally, after I quit, I decided it was time. I finished my first year. I did tell you that I went to junior college at Norman Park, played one play, and tore up my knee. I spent a week and a half in bed, and then one day I was sitting in front row. I had a crutch that I had propped up on. I had to get in the front row. And front row, where the smart people sit?
The front row.
Front row. The prof says, "Palmer, get back there and help them dumb girls." Well, there were 3 dumb girls back there asking silly questions. They didn't have the foggiest idea what was going on. Anyway, one of those, finally, I married her 5-6 years later. What happened was that I finally dated her the last semester in junior college, and she was in the school's trio, vocal trio, not trio center, but a vocal trio. And she and 2 other girls would get invited out to some of the area. By the way, it was a Baptist finance school, and there were many pastoral students that were there. And all the little churches had preachers who were freshmen and sophomores at the junior college that were their preachers. And they would invite the girls to different... Well, anyway, to get the story, we went one time, and the 3 girls, one of the girls asked the president if the boys could go with us, and he wouldn't let them. And she made the other 2 girls sit in the back, said, "If you say one word to Dr. Bodenhammer, I'll kick you out of this car." So anyway, I would go visit the church and go to church on Sunday morning, and they wouldn't have to go back with Dr. Bodenhammer. They'd go back with us. And so I got to see the girls more often than most people, but that was all time daytime. We got a date one night, Friday night, in the girls' dormitory, with a house mother sitting in the dormitory with us. That was our date night. Yeah, okay. And anyway, I finally broke up with her. She came in the theater one day, and we went out of the house, and I looked at her, and I told her, didn't love her, wasn't about to get married, and that she'd have to go back by herself and all. Anyway, about 4 years later, she had finished her schooling, gotten a job, and was teaching school in Warner Robins. And they had a tornado hit up there, and my mother said, son, doesn't Sarah live in Norton? Yeah. She says, well, you better find out what happened. Anyway, I found out, and I went to see her, and that following Christmas, we got engaged. So we got married, and that's part of had 3 children.